Welcome to Pachehra Talks. Today we are going to talk about something interesting: encryption. Encryption at rest. And to save time, I have created this. All right, so whenever we create anything on Azure, what we do, we just go to portal.azure.com. There is our subscription, and we create resources inside the subscription, as you can see on the screen. Azure subscription and Azure resources, right? It could be a storage account, your virtual machine, your SQL DB, any resource. All right, but if you think these data, this data that we are generating or we are creating, everything is happening somewhere in the Azure data center, right? It is at the back end, it's storing everything on the physical hardware, which is managed by the Microsoft, right? So all this data is stored here. And the data center has all those racks and things. So it's a huge data center which has like hundreds of units, and then the racks and all those physical hardwares are there. Now, by default, what Microsoft does, or Azure, it encrypts data. Okay, all the data in the data center by default is encrypted, which means, let's suppose there is somebody, okay, who pretend to be, or he's a imposter or something. Okay, he somehow gets his hands on one of the drive from this hardware uh, data center of Azure. So it would be worthless for this guy right here because it is encrypted. All right, so it's protecting your data in case of unauthorized access to the physical location or the hardware where the data center is. All right. So that's why all the data is encrypted. And this ensures that even if someone gains unauthorized access to the storage, they cannot read the data without the encryption key. Now, there is an interesting thing happens regarding this encryption keys. Okay. So let me write this down: encryption keys. The very first thing is this by default encryption by Azure is done through symmetric encryption key. And if you're wondering why symmetric, there is a valid reason for it. Symmetric key means a single key is used to encrypt the data when it is saved to the storage and decrypt it when it is needed by the same key. Because the data is huge, it's a large amount of data. That's the reason they use symmetric, so that it wouldn't have much impact on the performance and allow for quick encryption and decryption. All right. Now, the interesting part is this encryption key right here. So how this is happening? Data, data comes, key encrypts, and it writes down here. So through that key, the data is getting encrypted. Now, if somebody has get his hands on this key, the same gentleman who was here, now suppose he is here, okay, with the big fat, not so big, simple leg, and these are some hands. On, if he gets the access to this key, then he can make sense out of this data, right? Because he can use this encryption key. But it's not like that, because Microsoft encrypts this key by another key. Okay, so this key you could say is a data encryption key, and we have another key which is a key encryption key, you could say. Right? So they encrypt this key through another key. That's what they do. All right. So data encryption key is symmetric key used to encrypt data. All right. Each piece of data can have its own DEK or data encryption key to enhance security. If you're wondering what do you mean by each piece of data, let's understand this part. Each piece of data means, see, this is a huge data center, right? So we are not going to encrypt everything through the single key. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna make pieces or rather partition and encrypt that partition with their own DEK, data encryption key. That's what I'm saying, each piece of data. All right. So, and another key is key encryption key or KEK. And this part is DEK. Okay. KK. Key encryption key used to encrypt DEK. So this got encrypted, providing an additional layer of security. Key EK are stored securely in Azure Key Vault. All right. Now, this is happening at the data center level at the backend. But what if we mention here virtual machine? What if there is a disk, okay, and somebody, the same gentleman from here, now he manages to get into the access into this subscription somehow, unauthorized access to this subscription, and downloads this disk, okay, or rather, or move to a different uh, tenant, anything like that. Like he gets his hands on this disk, he can easily use the data, right? Because data is encrypted here, not here. So that's the reason we do have options to encrypt data here as well. So which is Azure disk encryption, we have Azure storage encryption, we have transparent data encryption, we have multiple ways to encrypt Azure resources and Azure data that we already talked about in a lot of previous videos, but this is for Azure Security Specialist series, and this is one of the topic that I have to cover. That's the reason I'm making this and trying to make it little interesting. I hope I am able to. All right, so that's the reason we encrypt data here. So this is happening by default. We are also doing and our data here encryption. And how can we do that? Well, it's very simple. There is this resource called Azure Key Vault. Okay, Azure Key Vault. And we use this Key Vault to save our key. Okay, so the same encryption key that we are encrypting this data now, we are encrypting. Okay, we can ask Azure to manage the keys, like use your keys and encrypt it. We are just enabling the encryption, or we can use our own key, which is customer managed key, right? Or we can ask Azure to do it, Azure managed key. So an Azure managed key would follow the same process that it follows for the data center. All right. Or if you are managing it, you create a key vault as a best practice. And because we also have a wonderful tool called what, Azure Entra ID, not Microsoft Entra ID, no, MS Entra ID, and it is linked with your subscription. There is a link. Okay, so you can use this Microsoft Entra ID for the permissions on the key vault and save your key here. So that's how you can manage the encryption. You can utilize your own key and you can ask Azure to do it for yourself, for you. All right. Now, there is something like what are the benefits of encryption if we need to talk about that. So let's talk about few benefits here. The very first is the data security. Okay, protect sensitive data for unauthorized access, right? Then compliance. They are, if there is some kind of compliance that you should be managing or making your environment compliant to 100% or 99.9%, it is always there, like your data should be encrypted. Okay, or then we can also see ease of management, like Azure provides tools to manage encryption and key seamlessly, like your key vault, your enter ID, your permissions, or they can manage the keys for you. So ease of management, right? Now if you talk about some good practices for like using disk encryption in Azure or encryption in Azure, that you are doing, you are enabling it. Things that you can do, the very first thing is you can regularly rotate keys. Okay, periodically rotate encryption keys stored in Azure Key Vault to enhance the security. Just like we always keep on changing our password, there are policies for 30 days, policies for 90 days. Similarly, we gotta keep rotating the keys. Okay, then you should monitor and audit all the accesses. Use Azure Monitor and MS Defender to track access to your encrypted disk and key vault. And you could have some kind of defender there applying the threat protection. You can also back up your keys. Okay, maybe it's not uh, breached, but you lost it. So ensure that you have a secure backup of your encryption keys. And finally, you should keep an eye on the compliance, like regularly review the compliance if you're managing any and act accordingly. So I think that's all about today's video. It was more of a conceptual. So protecting data with encryption at rest is essential for maintaining data security and compliance. And Azure provides robust options for managing encryption, whether you prefer Azure to handle it entirely or want to manage it yourself with Azure Key Vault. And I hope it was interesting and you learned something new today. Well, thank you for watching and you guys have a wonderful day. Bye.